Okay, my video is on, which means if you speak or come in front of me, you will be on YouTube, okay? So, I guess we shall get started. So when I was here just 3 weeks ago, I was introducing and explaining all the different historic liturgical rites of the Apostolic Church. Yes, we all recall this. In fact, if you look close enough, this board actually still has the stuff I wrote, which will make things a little easier for me. So what I did, just a quick recap, right? I talked about each of the historic rites of the church and how they get categorized. And, oh, wait, that's not correct. And I planted a seed on purpose because I wanted to draw people's attention to it. I mentioned the schism that took place, right, at the Fourth Ecumenical Council. So even though the way these rites are put in their categories is based on historical settings and not ecclesiastical lines per se, there did, because of the schism at Chalcedon, end up being a divide that essentially did result in these four rites here being known as what we now call Oriental Orthodox. All right, we're known as Eastern Orthodox. And yes, I know Eastern and Oriental literally mean the same thing in most languages. But they needed a way to differentiate us on the global scale. So, I sent Father Stephen a bunch of different materials, and I don't think it all got forwarded to everybody just because I had like an information overload. Did anybody, what was read? Did you get my article I wrote called Myth of the Monophysites? Did anyone get that one? Okay. Because I know for sure he sent that out. But then I sent him another PDF, which I have right here. I don't think that got sent out. That's fine. I've given this lecture with nothing in front of me and no one else with anything in front of them, so I am very capable. I just wanted to know where we were all at in terms of what you had read up on. So what inspired this was, like I said, I planted that seed, and somebody in this room, who I will not identify, but they can speak up if they want, pulled me aside after the presentation and said, if all rights matter, how come a Coptic person cannot commune here and I can't take it at their church? And I said, that's a great question, because it has to do with the schism and not with their rights. It just happens to be that because of that unfortunate schism, it resulted that these four rights were outside of union with us, and then we preserved these three, and then as we all know, eventually the East Syriac and the Roman also, and then we were just the Byzantine church for a while, and then we restored these two rights. The East Syrian is still currently not done in the church, but it's kind of like been in and out a few times. But we all know the Western or the Roman rite, you know, I serve in that largely when I'm not here. So we do have that in our current Eastern Orthodox church.
When was the date of the schism?
That is a great question, and that is what we are going to explore. So the council was 451, and so a lot of people just say the schism was 451. But the schism was actually later than that. Since you asked, I'll go ahead and just skip ahead to saying I would pinpoint the schism in about 536 is like the last final hard schism, and I'll get to why that is. So quick background, like the quickest you can imagine. First Ecumenical Council, right? It was Nicaea, yes. And a lot of things went down, like a lot of stuff there. But what was the primary thing? Yes, Arianism. I mean, the creed was part of that, yes. But yes, Arianism. He's kind of cheating because I told him about this last night. So, yeah, so it's that Christ is God, right? That was the main theme. There were other things, actually quite a bit. Like at my parish assignment up in Lafayette during Lent, I'm actually going to do a 4-part series on the councils themselves. So you can watch that on YouTube if you can't make it up there. So literally entire sessions could be done on each of the councils. And then we had the second council, which was in Constantinople. And does anyone remember what again, the primary issue I want to highlight is there? So if Christ is God was a controversy, what was the next step? What was Holy Spirit is God. Because you had people saying, okay, fine, maybe Jesus is, but Holy Spirit's not. So there you go. So these two councils were held, right? 325, 331, right? To settle these important issues as well as some others. So at this point, other than the people that didn't accept these councils, who went into schism and eventually their groups did die out, in the words of Saint Photius the Great, they were consigned to oblivion. So by the time we reach the 4th century, all of the groups that I'm talking about now, we still agree and are friends, right? Okay. Now, here's where things get really messy. So while this is going on, I kind of want to draw a map. So we have the West, right? This is not going to be a perfect map. So we have like the West, right? The Church of Rome. We have Alexandria, right, in Egypt. And that is pretty much, even in a pre-schism context, we could say this is the Coptic church prior to the schism. Then by extension to Alexandria, we have the Aksumite kingdom, or Abyssinia, what we now call Ethiopia. So I'll just put the modern word. And then over here, of course, I kind of get these geographies confused because they actually kind of intersect and stuff. But yeah, but basically there's Antioch, right? And then you do have Jerusalem, which kind of plays a role in a lot of this too, a little later. Antioch is primarily Syriac at this point, but there is also Byzantium or Constantinople. And then you've got like Armenia, and then really far east you have Seleucia Ctesiphon, but we're gonna call it the Persian church instead, or the Assyrian church. It's a serious issue. So, right, and this is kind of like far and east, right? So you've got this whole jumbling here, and again, like all of these have their respective rights. They're all in full union. They all agree that the first two councils are great, and everyone else is a heretic. I mean, it's great. It's great times. There's no golden age of the church, but this seems like this is a pretty good time. So what happened after that? We have a lot of different things going on. So Armenia, right, was the first Christian nation. They made Christianity the state religion as early as 301. Shortly after, the Aksumite kingdom did the same thing. And then the Roman Empire did, right? So our group that we associate ourselves with, or groups perhaps, were actually a little late on that.
Right.
And so we have a lot of different things going on because the Persian church is outside of the Roman Empire. And their Shah, okay, because that's what they called their emperors, their Shah or their emperor was actually trying to harmonize more with the Roman Empire. So things look promising. Maybe he'd even become a Christian. I don't know, that's not at all what went down, but you know, it seemed hopeful. So basically, the Persian church declares itself as autocephalous in 424, and actually in 420, the Council of Seleucia Ctesiphon is the first recorded evidence of an attempt at liturgical uniformity. So that's pretty interesting. They said there's a lot of different stuff going on in our church, and we're all going to follow what our center, which was Seleucia Ctesiphon, what they do there, and this and that, and so that actually is the first recorded attempt at liturgical uniformity, and they're declaring that they're autocephalous. And Armenia also has been split between the Roman Empire and the Iranian Empire. That's who was over the Persian church. People call it the Persian Empire, but it was never actually called that. Same thing, like there was never a Byzantine Empire, right? It was the Roman Empire, focusing more on the East, but we just say, Byzantine. But I'm going to try to say Roman Empire and Iranian Empire when I'm talking about the empires, because that's what they were known as. Now, while all this is going on, right, we have in Constantinople, now, or Byzantium, there's a priest named Anastasios in the early 5th century. And Anastasios makes a claim, I think it was on Christmas Day, about how God could not be born of a woman. And lay people were very obviously and very rightfully scandalized by this. They said, how can you say this? So they wrote to the patriarch, Nestorius, and Nestorius was like, I don't see a problem. And so that created more problems, right? And Saint Cyril of Alexandria, who was the Pope of Alexandria at the time, caught word of this and wrote letters to Nestorius, and he was saying, your most blessed holiness, there's no way you could be saying these things, right? I can't believe that you would say this, but if you are, here is the correct teaching of our church, right? And they're going back and forth, and it boiled down to the term Theotokos, right? Nestorius would publicly talk about his, issues with the other bishops in his sermons. I've read a lot of them. And he's like, they accused me of this. Well, you know what? Fine. I'll say Theotokos if you'll say Anthropotokos, right? Which means, the bearer of the man. And he's making a point that we shouldn't use that term. So he comes up with Christotokos. He says, she gave birth to Christ. Who's going to argue with me on that? The other patriarchs are like, no way, that's not at all. Yes, it is true she gave birth to Christ, but Theotokos is important because God became man, and that's the incarnation, and that's what we need to, espouse. So Nestorius decides to call a council, because he's like, I'm obviously going to be vindicated. This council was held in Ephesus. To be honest, I don't even remember where Ephesus exactly is, but it's modern day Turkey, right? So the council, I'm going to erase this now. You guys got this visual, right? As poorly as I drew it, you get what's going on. So the Council of Ephesus was held in 431, and it was intentionally done at the Church of St. Mary. That was done on purpose to be like, well, we're largely arguing over what we can now call Mariology as well as Christology, right? So that it was done that way on purpose, and it confirms the Virgin Mary as Theotokos. It says this is what we refer to her as. Yes, there's other titles, but that is the primary one, is Theotokos. It also confirmed the autocephaly of Cyprus for all the ecclesiological nerds out there that like to know that stuff, and a few other things. So obviously Nestorius is not happy about this. In fact, some accounts say he was condemned before he arrived. So the council he thought would vindicate him ends up backfiring because the whole church stands against him and says no. And so he's exiled to a monastery where he spends the rest of his days. So, again, we all agree and we're all friends. Eventually, though, the Persian church hears about this and they don't agree with the condemnation. And this will be something that throughout the next few centuries is a battle with the Church of Persia, is getting them to accept the Council of Ephesus, to condemn Nestorius, and then they're in and out of union with us for several centuries before it's solidified. But that is all still backdrop to the main issue. Right. There is another council held that is often referred to as Ephesus II. And you can guess that was also held in Ephesus too. I'm going to switch around here so people don't think I'm showing favoritism to one side of the room, Now, the reason Ephesus 2 was called is that there was an archimandrite in Constantinople. His name was Eutyches, and he was combating Nestorianism, rightfully so, but he was saying, we shouldn't think of it this way. We should think that Christ became man, and then his humanity was swallowed up by his divinity. And so people hear this and they're like, excuse me, no, that's also wrong in the other way. What's wrong with you? And this is where things get dicey. So the same emperor who convoked Ephesus, Theodosius II, who is a saint of our church, he was also the one to convoke Ephesus II in 449. I just want to highlight that for all the viewers at home. St. Theodosius II. And it's important, I'm highlighting the fact that this guy is considered a saint by us, even though he held this council, which we are going to reject in a few minutes. You'll find out why. Well, Ephesus II reinstated the heretic Eutychius, who had been excommunicated by Flavian of Constantinople, right? The patriarch at that time. And obviously Flavian's not happy about this. He's like, I summoned this because this guy is a heretic. And according to the others, when they called upon Eutyches to make a statement of faith, it was Orthodox. They said he was Orthodox in confession. Whatever he said before was some other kind of, I'm not sure. So Flavian is attacked by a mob, and we actually venerate him as a saint, right? We consider him a martyr because the people who did not like his ruling killed him. And this is where the problems really start to unfold.
Wow.
So, a council is then held in 451 at Chalcedon. And this is where the divide really begins. So going into this, we already have people that, like the Byzantines and the Romans, are considering responsible for the death of Flavian. Okay? People from the Alexandrian and the Syriac end of things, they blame them for his death. They kick out a monk named Barsama, who was a Syriac monk. They literally, in the minutes of the council, they say, he murdered Flavian, and they oust him. And I do want to say, this gets me in trouble a lot online when I talk about this, because all these little superheroes on their keyboards. If Barsama was directly responsible for the death of St. Flavian, he would have gone to jail. He was never jailed as far as we know. But nevertheless, the popular mindset was his provoking or his views led to his death. Okay? So, and I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying he did not hands-on kill him, right? And so this council condemns monophysitism, right? Eutyches, what he taught, that Christ really has only one nature because the human was swallowed up by the divine. And the Pope of Alexandria, his name is Dioscorus, put his name there, he originally vindicated Eutyches, and honestly, he's probably a little embarrassed now because he realizes that was a bad move. He leaves the council. He actually says before he leaves, if you, what's the exact quoting? I quote this in the article that was sent out, but since we don't have it in front of us, I think it's, if Eutyches has taught any heresy, he is worthy of death or hellfire or something, spicy like that. He says, I only care about the Catholic faith and my own soul. And then he leaves the council. So because he left the council, we condemned him to bye-bye. And so the group we now call, the Coptic Church, they view his deposition as invalid, and they're like, no, he left, he stormed out because he was unhappy with how things were going, and a lot of our guys were getting the blame for the death of Flavian. So there was a lot of back and forth, and all this was going on. One thing that's important to note is that Chalcedon had 520 to 630 bishops at any given time. That was like the largest council that had ever taken place at that point. And that was the other thing. According to some of the records, Dioscorus shows up and says, why are so many people here? Like, are you trying to have an ecumenical council? And he's like, well, actually, yes. But, so... Now, the emperor who led this was Marcian. So Theodosius II had actually already died. I forgot to mention that. That's mildly important. So it was Marcian, the emperor, who had this council, and it was done at the Church of Saint Euphemia, in Chalcedon. So, what happens after this? Nestorius dies in exile in 452. Nest dies. I don't want to write all that. However, before he dies, he writes something called the Bazaar of Heraclides. I've read it. It is quite bizarre. And he claims that Chalcedon is what he was trying to say the whole time. And so for the non-Chalcedonians, they're like, see, we told you it reeked of Nestorianism. What's wrong with you? Because they didn't like the wording, right? When we condemned this, we said, from the tome of St. Leo and others, we said that Christ is in two natures. Now, in Greek, that is en diophysis, okay? Why don't I rewrite that up there so everyone can see it better? Sorry. Oh, and St. Leo was the Pope of Rome at the time. Case, I failed to mention that. So he's sort of seen as the champion of Chalcedon. So yes, it's en diophysis, right? In two natures. However, the non-Chalcedonians, they were holding to the formula of Saint Cyril, right, the previous Pope of Alexandria, before Dioscorus, who taught ek diothesis, from two natures. Now, why does this matter? Well, because the word Saint Cyril put into use was miaphysis, which does mean one nature. But the difference between mia and mono is that mia allows for like two things to exist in one, whereas mono does not. Mono is like a radical oneness. And the term monophysite is one we came up with later, rightfully, for the Eutychian heresy, and then I would say, unfortunately, got misapplied to the miaphysites because they didn't accept the council. And then the actual Eutychians mostly died out, and then they were the ones left that we were fighting with. That is, and that is kind of how we got to where we are today. So, do we have any questions so far? Because I realize I just jammed a lot in.
Yeah.
Are you sure that you're in the right place?
Maybe. I've done another cup of coffee and I'll be a little bit more on. But when they say like his divinity aided his humanity, when they're saying that, what in the world? What does that mean?
So I just want to be clear, that is not what like the Copts and the Syriacs and the Armenians and the Ethiopians, that's not what they're saying.
Yeah.
That's what this heretic was saying.
Yeah, it's a very weird thing.
Yeah, it is weird. And my guess is that he was trying to, in contrast to Nestorianism, which had a sharp separation between the humanity and the divinity of Christ, because he taught that Christ had two hypostases, okay, which is a concrete reality that's made into a person, essentially.
Yeah.
To combat that, he felt the need to go the other way. And obviously he was embarrassed and apparently gave an Orthodox confession to other people, but then it still showed eventually at Chalcedon that he still was a heretic. So I honestly can't justify it because I don't believe in it, and I also think it's crazy to say that, because if your Christ does not have a humanity, then there's no point. He's like Hercules or something, right? Like it's just nothing, there's nothing salvific if he does not assume the human nature, if it gets swallowed up, right? So yeah, no, I mean, like we're on this, we all agree, right? It's just because of his wording. Oh, the other thing is, when Eutyches used the formula, he actually used this term, miaphysis. So then some people are like, well, people are using this word in different ways, which is part of why Chalcedon is like, let's go with into natures. And diaphysis was also used a lot in the West. So both of these were said by saints that we all venerate. That's the thing, is later we each hardened on these expressions, but if you read the pre Ephesus and Chalcedon fathers of the church, you will see both of these expressions used, right? So then it just came down to which one are we going to double down on. Did that help answer your question that I like sympathize with you, but can't really, like, I can't really justify a heresy that was stamped out, because thank God, it doesn't exist anymore. But
It just sounds like a guy that really doesn't like humans. I don't know, that's just how it sounds to me. If I was talking to them, I would just, anyways, it's very strange.
yeah, no, I got you, I feel you. The controversy does not end there. So, let's see. Okay, Nestorius dies in exile. I said that. Oh, also, meanwhile, the Persian church does reconcile with Rome and Constantinople in 457. So that's cool for now. Then there is in Ephesus 3 in 475. And it is actually written that 500 to 700 bishops were there at any given time. So this is almost as big, if not slightly bigger, than Chalcedon, because the Chalcedon controversy is still going on. And so the people that lead this are the leaders of the Coptic and the Syriac churches, because at this point, Alexandria and Antioch are pretty much all non-Chalcedonian, okay? And they hold this council with Basilicus, the emperor. So what's the first thing they do here? They condemn Monophysitism. First order of business. We are not Monophysites. We condemn Monophysitism and Eutychianism. It's even said that some of the things that vindicated Eutyches in their Ephesus 2 have actually been like thrown out because they were embarrassed. So they were like, well, okay, yeah, no, we don't want any record that we ever liked that guy. Like they admit that it happened, but the minutes in the previous one are hard to find because they tried to make them disappear. You know, it makes sense. I get it. So they rightfully condemn his heresy. They also did a lot of what Chalcedon already did, confirming Nicaea, Constantinople, and Ephesus as ecumenical councils, okay? But then it also condemns Chalcedon. So I'm looking at this saying, like, you're both condemning the same guy and affirming the same things, but then you're just like, but we don't like this other thing. And the frustration just continues from there. So there's a lot of different steps. I'm not going to go through all of them, but some highlights. 482, there is something called the Henoticon of the Emperor Zeno. And basically the Henoticon, so that's another Greek word for one. It means like to unite. So I think what Zeno was going with here was that this word was meaning both the Christology, but also the unity between the two factions, right? So it was a bit of a pun, if you will. Problem is, nobody liked it. So it did not get put forth, and anyone that tried to really promote it was met with a lot of backlash on either side, okay? And then in 484, sorry, it's hard to write like sideways. 484, we have something called the Acacian Schism. And this, my friends, is wild. I might need to draw this out, but Constantinople will not condemn Antioch or Alexandria for not accepting Chalcedon, right? And the patriarch of Constantinople, his name is Acacia, right, or Acacius. So he does not like when people talk about the Council of Chalcedon, one way or the other. He doesn't like people who push it, and he doesn't like people that condemn it. He's like, let's just be quiet about it and let kind of things soak. So Rome says, you need to condemn Antioch and Alexandria. And he says, I believe no such thing. So Rome excommunicates Constantinople. And it's known as the Acacian Schism because of Acacia. But also, the funny thing is, the leader of the Persian church, a few years into this schism, his name is also Acacia, or Acacius. And he actually writes letters to Rome and Constantinople and says, I'm still in union with you. Don't there's a bunch of Nestorians out in my wing, and I know you guys have this whole other thing that you're dealing with. We're cool with Chalcedon. I'm cool with Ephesus. We're cool. So we have the Far East writing to Constantinople and Rome saying, like, notice me, like, I love you, like, we're one. And then Rome's like, I don't like Constantinople right now because he won't condemn the other two. It's like, that would have been the time to be alive, right? And yeah, that does get reconciled eventually. And Acacius, funny enough, is a saint in the Coptic church. Not a saint in our church, but somehow they actually venerate him, even though they took more of an anti-Chalcedonian stance later on. They actually venerate the guy that was trying to keep the peace by just not speaking about it, funny enough. So you do see throughout history people on either side of this. Sometimes they're more diplomatic, sometimes they're more harsh. I think it depends. But one thing I think is a takeaway here, and then I'll open this up for a discussion like I'm supposed to do, is this is the first time in history we see a schism like this, right? I mean, you see like the numbers are almost even on either side. And 4 major churches or 4 major traditions left like communion with us, right? That's a huge deal. Nothing like that has ever happened really before or since, right? It's pretty even. Because if you're talking about the Nestorian issue with the Persian church, well, 6 out of 7, they, yeah, you like that? 6 out of 7 of the churches or the liturgical traditions are saying this is wrong, right? And the Persian church is the lone one saying, no, we like, the heretic Nestor. And not even all of them were saying that. And then later with the Great Schism with Rome, what do we always say? Oh, 4 out of 5 patriarchs, right? So again, it's like you have these major breaks that have like one group or one guy being against everyone else. But in this case, this is a pretty even split, if I can dare use the expression, the splitting of the church, which I mean more in like an ideological way, and not necessarily in a a literal way. But and then basically throughout the years, there have been saints on both sides and other people that have engaged in dialogue. Saint Photius the Great in the 9th century actually almost fully reconciled. He was meeting with the Armenian church. I think he had Armenian family members, and so that kind of inspired him to talk with them. But they ultimately failed, and you have other saints on their end who basically say that they don't have a problem with us anymore, and some of them even scratch their head. They're like, we don't even know why the people before us really took an issue with this. And various things happened, like wars and empire shifting that, really prevented any kind of reunion. And then in the 19th century, you have Porfiry Uspensky, who later became a bishop in what we now know as Ukraine. He was traveling throughout Jerusalem and the Middle East, and he met leaders from the Coptic church, the Armenian church, the Syriac, and the Ethiopian church. And he's like, they are in no way heretics. They're not Monophysites, they're not Eutychians like we had thought all these centuries, and so we need to do something about this.
When was that?
This was
9th century.
19th century.
19th.
Yeah, I don't have exact years on my notes, but he is 19th century. I can get those for you though.
Nothing changed.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's like one guy says something and we're like, okay, cool. And in the 20th century, it was amazing, really in part to the ecumenical movement. And I know you go online or even just go to a parish, people have all kinds of opinions about ecumenism and what it means and what it is, etc. But it is in part thanks to the ecumenical movement that all representatives on every side of the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox and were able to sit down and actually talk about these things in depth, because in the past it was like Constantinople was talking with Armenia or something, or Russia was talking to Ethiopia, right? But now it's like everyone on both sides is sitting down and talking, and they were able to hammer out. They had dialogues from the 1960s through the 1990s, came out with a handful of agreed statements, and it basically said it looks like we have actually believed the same things all this time. And then they were coming up with suggestions on how to heal this and make this work. And we're still not in full union. I use that phrase intentionally because there have been areas of the world where people have made pastoral arrangements to pretty much count the other side as part of you if they don't have another church of their own that they can go to. That's a policy even in some of the jurisdictions here. This is another thing where people get very upset with me and threaten me and stuff like that when I just say there's been intercommuning between the two in the Middle East. That has happened. That's written on paper that it happens. I was told that technically that was only supposed to be in local settings, in arrangements I just mentioned before where there's only an Oriental church or only an Eastern church, but both are there. But inevitably, everyone knows that it has spread throughout most of the Middle East, especially in Egypt and Syria itself, where the patriarchs are. That does not extend over here. It has before in some jurisdictions, kind of less officially, but officially speaking, there's no intercommuning here in the States, even though it has happened, but it's not technically supposed to happen.
Within a couple of years ago, we tried to go to a service at a Coptic church, and we were told we can go say prayers, and that was about it.
Okay. You don't need to name them, but was it a bishop or a priest who told you that?
Oh, priest.
Oh, okay, yeah, yep. That's all I need to know. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, and so I have a blessing to attend Oriental Orthodox services, in part because when I converted to Orthodoxy in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, I was in an area full of Ethiopians and Egyptians. So I was visiting their services, I was visiting our services, and I understood the boundaries, so I was told, yeah, it's fine. They have an apostolic liturgy, their rites matter, okay? But just don't, when you become Orthodox, just don't, receive there. I was like, no, of course not. So, and then in seminary, St. Vladimir's seminary is either famous or infamous for its dialogue with, the non-Chalcedonians. We led a lot of local dialogues here in the States, and we've been kind of the forerunner on that end, especially in America, but also in things that occur worldwide. When I was at Vlad's for 5 years, each year varied, but anywhere between a third to a fourth of our students were Oriental Orthodox of various jurisdictions. And then my last 2 of my 5 years there, I lived at the Armenian seminary because they had their own school that was accredited through St. Vlad's. And they bought property actually in my hometown of Armonk. So I got to go back home, like literally, and like live at this Armenian school that was not there when I was a kid. So that was a neat experience. And Armenians have an official policy to commune us. So I went to a divine liturgy there one day, and someone asked me why I didn't receive. And I said, I'm not allowed to. And he's like, oh, right, yeah, okay. And I was like, okay, fine. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't shove it down my throat. The funny thing is, though, shortly after the Chalcedonian Schism, we had families that were split between this. And there were, like, families would show up to, like, one of our services. All right, and this is in, like, the 5th and 6th century. They'd show up, and the non-Chalcedonian party would not commune, and the priest would shove the communion down their throat. So I've never read about a schism where priests are literally shoving communion down someone else's throat on the other side. It's usually the opposite. It's usually like, don't you dare approach here. But the priest is like, nah. Like, so to me, that does show that something was different, even if like the people didn't fully understand, the Holy Spirit was moving in spite of this. But I've been told by priests and by bishops that, us that are in the clerical ranks, we can do a lot of stuff, but the hope and the desire is going to have to come from the ground up. So now I want to hear from all of you about what you think about this. Is it scandalous to you that, okay, a schism that's now 1,500 years old was really over a misunderstanding and some wording? I mean, is that like, it is kind of embarrassing. I mean, if we're going to accept that as true, right? Is it possible? Should we dwell on it? Should we just work forward? Like, yeah, so what are your thoughts? And don't worry about offending me. You cannot offend me. If people are like threatening my livelihood online and they're not offending me, well, okay, maybe a little bit, but you will not offend me. So
I have to say the Coptics were exceptionally kind to Michelle and I. We enjoyed our time of worship there, and we went several times, and there was never a point where we were like, oh, this is hinky, or oh, this is sketchy.
And this guy's a deacon for everyone at home. This guy's a deacon who's saying this.
I've never heard people say the Our Father as fast
oh my gosh,
as they could.
A lot of Orientals do that. Yeah, they do it very fast.
I was still on Our Father and never finished.
and they do it multiple times throughout the service.
Yes.
So eventually you pick up the pace, right? You're like, by time number 6.
Maybe got 4 words in it before they
Our Texas jaw just couldn't keep up.
No way.
Oh, man.
I don't think so.
So are you saying that the disagreements or the reason that we are not in communion with some of these is due to semantics?
I'd say that's a reason. I don't know that I'd boil it down to that, like only. And like words are important. I mean, the schism from Nicaea, which we obviously won because there's no technical like lineage-wise Arians left. There's other groups that like reinvent the Arian heresy, but like Arians as like a group, have been dead for quite some time, right? So that was over what, like homoousios versus homoousios, right? Like an I or like a iota, yeah. So over that one letter. And that was right. That was a very correct thing to argue over. So I don't mean to boil this down to like, oh, it's ek versus n. Like it is that, but that does have meaning. The difference though is, like I said, we have saints that both sides venerate prior to any of these controversies that spoke in both ways. And this is also a unique thing about the schism is like now, we each double down on a phrase that if you go back in history, you'll see both are used. So, does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Comment, there's a saying that when 2 Greeks get together, you will have 2 different opinions.
Yeah.
So the fact that any of these people agree with each other is miraculous.
Right?
In your opinion, are we closer to communing with the other groups, or is this never going to happen?
So are you asking, are we closer to the Oriental Orthodox than we are to like other groups like the Roman Catholics? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
I definitely 100% think we are closer to the Orientals than to the Roman Catholics, and I will explain why. Because we were in union with Rome longer, right? I mean, that schism was only 11th century, And that's why when, it's funny, because I'll have to like twist my argument a bit sometimes when I have to defend the Western Rite. I say, well, are you okay if non-Chalcedonians use their rights if they reunite? And more often than not, people are like, oh yes, of course. I'm like, well, we were in union with the West longer, so the Western Rite like really, does belong to us. However, I will say, we have what, 7 councils, right? The non-Chalcedonians only accept the first 3. So an argument I've been told is Rome accepts all 7 of our councils, so they're closer, right? Can anyone tell me where the problem with that is? I'll give you 3 seconds. Okay, so you're getting there. Rome has 21 councils, right? That they consider ecumenical. So if you look at the math here, we are closer to the Orientals, who really haven't changed much of anything from just not accepting our council and then the subsequent ones, whereas Rome has changed a lot of things, right? So, yeah, so it's, we were in union longer, and on paper, you would think we would be, nearer to them, but actually, they, and I'm not saying this in like a rude way, but like, I think we would all agree as Orthodox, like they strayed further, so that's why. Yes, sir.
You're specifically talking about 1054 in regards to the Romans? I mean, in regards
Yeah,
to the...
I kind of attribute the schism a little later, but yeah, that schism with the Roman Church in the 11th century, right? Because that's at least 7 centuries after this council that we're speaking about, right? So yeah, I mean, to me it does, like, on base level, if I didn't know all the stuff I know, this does sound fantastical, right? A group that's been out of union for 1,500 years has somehow believed the same things this whole time, and they're closer to us than another group that's only been out for 1,000, right? Yeah, I mean, but when you actually do the homework, you do the math, you look at everything, you're just like, oh, okay, that actually kind of makes sense.
Is there currently a type of schism or non-union with another canonical jurisdiction?
Are you talking about the one I think you're talking about?
Yes.
Yes, so this is the thing. Schism can exist within the church. I'm going to let you digest that for a few seconds, because it goes against everything a lot of us are taught. Schism can exist within the church. Now, it should be rectified, because then it will lead to, one group being outside the church, yes. But schism can exist within the church. So what she's talking about is the schism that your patriarchate has with the Russian church right now. Right now, this really doesn't affect you, because the only church this would affect would be the Rokor church in Denver. Yeah, like St. Michael's down the street, they're part of the OCA. So even though they follow the Russian style, Father Zechariah is more than okay to come and concelebrate here, and vice versa. Like we all saw at Father Tom's funeral, right? Like Father Stephen and Father Dennis were both there and concelebrating at St. Michael's. So there's no local divide, because the OCA is actually autocephalous. Even though we often, especially in like Greek circles, refer to the OCA as the Russian church because they follow the Russian style. But yes, so technically speaking, any cleric of the Moscow or the Russian church or the Russian church outside of Russia cannot concelebrate with clergy of the ecumenical patriarchate or the Church of Constantinople and all of its eparchies and
who is
exarchates.
saying that? The Russians?
The Russians, did that in 2018 because of the whole thing in Ukraine that was going on, and it still is.
Does that affect Rokor?
Rokor, because they are an autonomous synod of the Moscow church, they decided to follow with that. I don't know that Moscow told them to do anything. They decided, but there's been exceptions. Like when that first went down, I know of cases where Rokor priests were given permission to concelebrate with Greek or other ecumenical patriarchate priests as long as they were going to another church. So for example, Russian priests and Greek priests could meet at the Antiochian church or meet at the Serbian church and concelebrate, but they couldn't go to each other's. Like it was like, because they realized both are still in full union with everyone else. I got some flack for going to, when I was still in seminary, there was a picture of me communing from Archbishop Daniel Zelinsky of the Ukrainian Church of the USA. He's under the Ecumenical Patriarchate and has been for quite some time, but he was one of the architects that helped create the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, right? That a lot of our churches are having an issue with. So there was a priest who said to me, like, how can you commune from him after what he did? And I said, until Antioch is not in communion with the ecumenical patriarchate, I will still continue to commune for him. He doesn't care about what my opinion is about what he did over there, and he's still a canonical bishop. So, but yeah, it's caused some issues, you know, and definitely some stress locally because there are priests and bishops that have their opinions about it. But technically, especially here in Colorado, the only parish it would affect is All Saints of Russia in Denver, right? And,
And their roll call. So
Yeah.
roll call does not allow us to communicate with them?
ROCOR will allow you, last I knew, I've heard a few priests say stuff that was different, but remember, I served in a ROCOR mission for a year and a half while this was going down. Officially speaking, last I knew, any Russian church, ROCOR or Moscow, will commune members, like lay people of the ecumenical patriarch. What they will not do is let your priest come serve in their altars and communicate there.
Well, and I asked because we have some oblates in the roll call.
Right.
And when they come to the retreat, and they're at, you know, communing in the
Right. So in Antiochian, our Western Rite monastery, right, which is under the Antiochian Archdiocese, that's kind of neutral ground because Antioch is still in full union with Russia, and we're still in full union with Constantinople. So yeah, that shouldn't be a problem in any way. Yes, sir.
Do you have a book, a good book that you would
I
to
do.
tell us all about all this?
So I also have to shameless plug that I do have an article that Father Stephen sent out that apparently nobody saw. It's called, but if you Google it or come message me, I'll send it to you. It's called Myth of the Monophysites. Now I want to be clear, I didn't title it that. I submitted it with no title, and the editor came up with that name. It was pretty spicy. So, and just in case anyone's worried, that article was blessed by Archbishop Michael of the OCA Diocese of New York and New Jersey. I have full permission from my bishop, John Abdullah of Worcester, to speak on this issue, okay? So I'm, you know, even though there's people who want to say I'm a heretic and I'm anathema and I'm disobeying my hierarchy, I'm actually in full compliance with my hierarchy on this, especially because Antioch, you know, as I've stated, was one of the leaders of this dialogue. It's funny that we seem closer with the Orientals in the places where the schism really took shape, Alexandria and Antioch, right? That's where, like, for lack of a better term, that's where the patriarchate split, right? To this day, there's a Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Alexandria and a Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch, and then there's, you know, the Syriac Church of Antioch and the Coptic Church of Alexandria. Okay, yeah, she's got my article on the phone there, so she can forward that. But to me, it's very telling. The places where the schism really took root and really hurt a lot of people, that's where it's actually healing the most. There's people I know who come from Egypt and Syria, and they come to America, and they don't even realize we're not in union. Now, you could argue that's a problem on the other end, right? Because we're not going to heal a schism if we don't have boundaries. Right, and so I get that. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's how it is. I've been to Coptic services where people have approached me and asked me why I didn't receive, and I'm like, well, one, you should actually mind your business. But number two, I don't have a blessing to. And they're like, but in Egypt, and I'm like, this ain't Egypt, buddy. Like, I don't know what to tell you. So, but yes, so my article, and then this book, right here. It is, I'll put it to the camera and I'll spread it around. This lady, Christine Chaliot, she came to visit St. Vladimir Seminary while I was there. I actually was her driver for like the weekend that she was there. She compiled this great book here. It's called The Dialogue Between the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox Churches. Okay? See it over there. If anyone wants to take a picture of this, just pass it around, just be gentle. This book is now almost 10 years old. It came out in 2016. And the foreword has a blessing from y'all's patriarch, okay? His All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople wrote the foreword to this book. So it's something that all the patriarchates and local churches, again, on both sides, really support, even though, you know, there are bishops who also have their hesitancy, and I don't blame anyone for being unsure or being weary. I do blame people, though, when they get nasty and threatening and violent and use foul language just because they don't like that someone's even daring to talk about this. So, but I'm always, I'm always open to talk with people about it. I know some of this can be very unsettling, and it's very challenging to the nature, the nature of the church as we understand it at times. And for the record, I fully embrace and fully accept the teachings of the Council of Chalcedon. Okay, I just am sympathetic to the churches who didn't, because I understand, like, especially, 1,500 years later, it looks like they believe the same thing. They just didn't like the wording, and there was a few other things. Okay, but I am a Chalcedonian, and I obviously I'm a member in good standing. I'm a minor order clergyman of the Antiochian Archdiocese. So
There's a Coptic writer I like, Matthew the Poor.
yeah,
I really like his
we were reading Matthew the Poor when I lived at Ladyminster for a time. He was like the spiritual reading. Yeah. Like, and Matthew the Poor probably will become a canonized saint in the Coptic Church, and he quoted from a lot of our post-schism or post-Chalcedonian fathers too. Like, he had major respect for like a lot of our guys. Yeah. So
Can you find that on Amazon, you know?
this book, I don't know if it's still currently in print, but if it is, it should be. And if you can't find it, somehow get in touch with me, and I'll make it happen somehow. Yeah.
These Orthodox countries in Africa are these places where Orthodoxy is taking root, such as Nigeria and Kenya. Where do they fit in?
So what's funny about that, most of the people converting in Africa, like the two places that you just mentioned, and also I had some classmates from seminary from Nigeria, from Uganda. They are part of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Alexandria.
I see.
Yes.
Facebook, the source of all truth.
Yeah, right. So the Alexandrian Patriarchate has been
I see
doing.
videos, and the priest is dressed like a Greek priest.
Yeah.
And he's using some Greek and some English and some, I don't know what.
And then an African folk song gets thrown in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the
Huge congregations.
absolutely.
Yeah, I like how they use local, customs.
Yes, yeah, and so the Patriarchate of Alexandria and the Patriarchate of Antioch, both of those churches, somebody looking at this could just write us off. Well, you just became the Greek church of your thing, right? But actually, it shows that even though we are the Byzantine church of those respective areas, there's been a lot of missionary work done, right, on both of our behalves that do factor in local traditions, and not quite the same thing. But I think the fact that Antioch has a Western rite also shows that Antioch was always a place of cosmopolitan diversity. So, and yeah, so if we're back on the all rights matter kick, it's been said, it's unquestioned that if there is reunion between us and the non-Chalcedonians, they will keep their rights. They're for amazing and beautiful historic rights. There's like very few, anyone that has the opinion that they wouldn't has no like official position of authority. It's just their incorrect opinion. So even if you think they are heretics after all this time, you cannot deny that their rights matter. That's the bottom line.
What's
So,
the Greek word for opinion?
opinions?
You know
Uh,
what I'm talking about?
theologumena?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. But see, a theologumena is like a good opinion, though, because the word God is in there. It means like a godly opinion.
I see.
Yeah. Saying all rights don't matter is not a godly opinion. No. It is not. All right. All rights.
Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, camera's turning off, so if you want to ask me something you don't want recorded in about 5 seconds, will be the safe zone. But if you want to ask me something you want to be recorded, come up to me really fast right now.
Is it off?
It's about to be. Well, I went twice as long as last time. I love this.